A core theme of Donald Trump's presidential campaign is that he's kind of a nationalist Robin Hood, a rich businessman who can bring jobs back to the little guy. But the clip you just saw is from a documentary film detailing Trump's actual business practices, whether he's actually been that successful, and how he treated the real-life little guys who worked for him. The film, Trump, What's the Deal, was produced back in 1991, but the filmmakers say it was never released publicly because Donald Trump shut it down by threatening lawsuits. But now, the film is available for anyone to see online, just as Donald Trump is poised to become the Republican presidential nominee. The film includes details about Trump's alleged use of aliases like the now notorious fake names John Miller and John Barron, not just to promote himself, but also to intimidate people. Trump has recently denied ever using those aliases, but the Washington Post last week reported on a 1990 lawsuit in which Trump admitted under oath to using the name John Barron while describing his rise to the top of the real estate game in the 1980s. The documentary unpacks allegations around Trump's use of around 200 underpaid Polish immigrants who all lacked working papers during the construction of Trump Tower. Trump has previously said that he did not know the legal status of the workers. And when asked recently, he said the allegation was wrong and that he was not directly involved in hiring workers. By the way, we did reach out to the Trump campaign for a statement on the documentary, but we have not heard back. And joining me now is
filmmaker and producer of Trump, What's the Deal, Libby Handros, along with the Daily Beast, David Cay Johnston. And thank you both for being here. And Libby, I'll start with you on this issue of the film actually never being seen at the time. What happened after you made the film and attempted to get it shown?
Well, what happened was we found out, you got to go back to when we completed the film. It's the late 80s, early 90s. There are no cable stations like the one we're all watching this morning. There are 3 networks and there are a couple of independent stations. And the film was designed to be was originally the pilot for a whole series on celebrity businessmen. This was the first. And as we started completing the film, we had a trailer and we had a distributor, and we started to hear back from our distributor that nobody wanted the film. And when we queried more, we found out that they were being threatened by Donald, that if they took the film, Donald would sue them. And of course, you know, even if a lawsuit has no merit, you've got to answer it. And nobody wanted the problems entailed with all of that. So basically, the film sat on a shelf for 25 years. Wow. And 4 years ago, when Donald started to make noise about running, we dusted it off. We took a look at it. We're like, hey, this is, you know, still a really good film. Yeah. And so it was ready to roll when he announced in July that he was going to run for president, and we put it out online.
And one of the things that's interesting is that you do talk about this sort of celebrity culture of the 1980s, where sort of wealth itself was worshipped. We all remember Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, but celebrity businessmen were worshipped too. What did that enable Donald Trump to get away with?
I think that enabled Donald to get away with everything that he has done. So people looked at the headlines, and he was a master at getting headlines, and nobody looked beneath what he was saying to them. So if he said, for example, we detail in the film how when he was marketing Trump Tower, he said that Queen Elizabeth was going to, you know, buy an apartment in Trump Tower. I mean, on the face of it, that's an incredible statement. Right. And, you know, the Buckingham Palace said, of course, at no time was she ever going to buy an apartment. But the story ran. And the story ran. We also detail how, for example, Donald said Gorbachev, when he came to this country for the first time, was going to stop at Trump Tower. No, of course not. Yeah.
And David Cay Johnston, on the darker side of some of the details that we get out of this film were, number one, in the construction of Trump Tower, some of the substandard building materials used, the way that he used tax credits that were designed for building low-income housing to build these highly leveraged buildings with other people's money. But talk a little bit about this issue of these Polish workers. What Donald Trump did to them and how John Barron figured into it.
Well, Donald, through a subcontractor, hired about 200 Polish men, most of whom were here in the country illegally, and they worked alongside members of the House Wreckers Union. Now, normally, non-union workers on a site like that would shut things down right away, but the mob controlled these unions, and Donald had the same lawyer as the mobsters, Roy Cohn, and Donald had no trouble, therefore, with the unions because of this. There's good reason to think Donald met personally with Fat Tony Salerno, the head of the biggest crime family in New York. And Donald didn't pay these workers as they were supposed to be paid. They were only to get $4 to $6 an hour and no benefits. They slept on the site. Many did not have hard hats. They were taking live wires out of the walls with no gloves. They were working with asbestos, and they had no face masks. And never once did a federal job inspector or state job inspector show up, to our knowledge, at that website. And Donald eventually was found after trial to have given testimony that wasn't credible. He said he had no idea what was going on. He had an office across the street with a picture window view, and he went to the site. Judge found his testimony lacked credibility and that Donald had engaged in a conspiracy to cheat these workers out of their money.
And the thing that the John Barron piece plays into it is essentially what? How did this fake persona of John Barron wind up playing into that controversy over the workers?
Well, the John Barron character was used as part of a campaign to intimidate people not to pursue their rightful claims against Donald because they were not being paid. He also used John Barron to try and trick various journalists into thinking he was a PR man for them. And it's part of a general Donald Trump strategy to trick people and deceive them, which he brags about in his book, and to intimidate them. Donald called me April 27th to tell me he's going to sue me if he doesn't like what I write about him. And while I'm not intimidatable, I've hunted down a cold-blooded killer and run into a burning building. Lots of journalists are intimidatable, and Donald is trying very hard to make sure the American public doesn't know the reality of his character and his conduct.
And you know, this issue specifically with the mistreatment of these Polish workers, as you said, were exposed to asbestos, taking live wires out with their bare hands, no protections, no safety, and not being paid properly. This actually came up during the primary. I want you guys to listen to Marco Rubio attempting to bring this up in really just the awkwardest way and not really getting the information out as he wanted to. Take a listen.
You're the only person on the stage that's ever been fined for hiring people to work on your projects illegally. You hired some workers from Poland.
I'm the only one on the stage that's hired people. You haven't hired anybody.
Well, in fact, some of the people he hired. Well, but hold on.
By the way, I've hired tens of thousands of people over my job. You've hired 1,000 people from another company, from another country. Credit cards, etc.
Let me say. Let me finish the statement. This is important.
You haven't hired one person in your life.
He hired workers from Poland, and he had to pay $1 million or so in a judgment for hiring.
That's wrong.
That's a fact.
Totally wrong.
And David, you saw the way that Donald Trump was able to shut down Marco Rubio's attempt to get this very information out. Is that how he's been able to get away with these kinds of blatant scandals that are precisely against the same kind of working class little guy that he claims to be defending? Is that how he does it?
That's exactly how he does it. And Rubio made a factual error. It wasn't $1 million. Which Donald exploited, but Donald always tries to shout down, shut off, say it's not true. Donald has a well-documented history of inflating numbers about his wealth and income and making up things about other people and trying to turn the crowd against really hearing what's going on. And we need to understand his conduct and his character if we're going to give him the nuclear launch codes.
And Libby, I want to play one more piece from your documentary, and this is about another aspect of Donald Trump you bring out, and it's his treatment of Ivana Trump and women. Take a listen.
Everyone that works for Donald spends 50% of their time worrying about incurring Donald's wrath, except for one person, Ivana Trump. He said she spends 90% of her time trying to worry about how not to get Donald to yell at her and now how not to incur his wrath.
When Trump bought the Plaza Hotel, he made her president. Her salary, he said, would be $1 a year and all the dresses she could buy. A way of complimenting her and putting her in her place at the same time.
He treats people, I've seen people treated horribly, including his own family, by him. Extraordinary verbal assaults.
Is that consistent with what you learned about just Donald Trump's general treatment of women?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, he hires women, but then he has a way of belittling them in the workplace and not giving them their due. But he also can be very unpleasant to the men who work for him as well. To be fair, he's probably not the easiest and nicest employer in the world to work for. We also tell the story in the film of a helicopter crash that killed 3 of his top executives in Atlantic City. And after mourning them, you know, like a week later, he blamed them in the New York Times for the collapse of his Atlantic City empire. I mean, is that how you treat dead, beloved workers?
Yeah, and not only that, but the subcontractor who he got to redo the ice rink. I didn't even know this until watching your film, that he was actually behind getting the ice rink in Central Park redone. But tell us what he did with that subcontractor.
Well, you know, it's a very standard trick that Donald plays. He gets paid, and he gets everybody else either to, you know, carry the bill or do the work for, out of their own pockets. So, for example, on Woolman Rink, he was paid a management fee, but he got all the subcontractors to do it pro bono.
Yeah.
And they didn't realize at the time that he was going to take a fee. And in Atlantic City, when he went bankrupt, what ended up happening is he got a huge management fee, but all the workers in the casinos, they lost their pensions, they lost their benefits, and vendors were left holding the bag too as well.
Yeah. I recommend that everybody take a look at this film. Libby Handros, thank you so much. The documentary is called Trump, What's the Deal? It's available on iTunes. I highly recommend people take a look at it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you also to David Cay Johnston.